Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. Man, we're only 2 months left in your fantasy footy season to go. That means if you're league focused, you're 4 weeks away from a traditional finals matchup. While for those going rankings, we're probably just 1 week away from getting the truest representation of where we're at. And by that I mean the buys are through, those that have kind of just sideways traded over the past couple of weeks will now start to get exposed. We're really 1 week away from getting a true rankings representation of exactly where you find yourself. There's a lot we got to chat about. Joining me on this episode, though, I've got Kane. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very well, MJ. Yeah, this is always a funny time, isn't it? Because it really seems to narrow down. We know in the limited trades formats, it's usually around where you either don't do anything, or maybe you're doing a final upgrade. I guess in this case, there's some big name guys that are out that we might have to think about, and maybe even preparing for some big name players returning to their sides and the impact they may have on some guys that have been awesome selections in recent weeks.
Yeah, it's very, very true. Look, throughout this episode, we want to make sure, and in a moment, we will touch on Tom Stewart and what coaches should or shouldn't be considering as viable moves through there, and whether or not he's a move at all. We want to talk cash cows. We're starting to see a few on the bubble this week in Dream Team and Supercoach. Bazzo and Mossimo are probably two of the most attractive for coaches. We want to talk about them, let alone any others that do come once teams are revealed on the final part of your Thursday afternoon. I've got to talk luxury trades. You already alluded to it, but the wall is coming for a few players that we need to address. And then, of course, our Patreon questions. We love our Patreons. If you want to join the supporter group, all you got to do is go to coachespanel.tv, and for as little as a couple of bucks a month, you can show your support and get access to exclusive content that nobody else gets, including an article I've already written for Patreons this week of whether or not it's too late to get on Luke Jackson. I don't really address that too much, other than the fact that I've already answered what I think across the formats you should be doing. Our Patreons have already got that. All right, let's get into it. Tom Stewart, Kane, is probably, for those that owned him, he's been one of those incredibly great guys to own this year. Not crazy ownership, still relatively popular, but his ceiling this year and on multiple times have been matchup and rankings defining. He's now 4 weeks out. Before we look at the viable names to look at, is he a must trade, or are there some variables that for you, Kane, kind of have to pop before you pull the trigger on him?
Well, maybe, MJ, if you've got one trade left in a limited trade format and you've got a decent bench, maybe you think there's a way, looking at the fixture, you might be able to have a little look. Maybe this weekend you can have a look at D'Ambrosio on a Saturday afternoon before Tom Stewart plays. Now, in reality, you're probably losing 50 points a week, taking Tom Stewart down to that rookie. Say if the rookie's going at 60, and you could probably turn them into a 110 if you don't have one of those big dog defenders in Supercoach.
Yep.
Maybe it's a little less in DT, but it's probably not too much. So you're probably looking at 200 points, which is a lot. Lot.
In 8 weeks, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably where I'd lean, that you just got to go with it and you just got to hope. Now, once you're at zero, who knows what could happen? You could easily, 200 points could be nothing by that point of the season if you lose someone else. But I think you got to deal with the hand you dealt there and just say, well, I've got to go for it. The only situation you probably could hold him is if your league's focused, you're in a good spot, and you think nothing in the next 4 weeks is going to determine really where I finish. I think I'll be in the mix. I'll save that one trade to try to progress through my league finals, which does happen to a lot of coaches.
Absolutely.
If they're not in the top, there's a lot of cash leagues going around where people go, you know what, I'm just going to play for this grand final. I'm going to conserve a little bit. So you can see some big movements in the rankings purely on some good teams doing that, going, well, difference between 300th and 2000th really doesn't bother me.
Yep.
Especially if there's not a prize for, top scorer in your league, or if maybe that you can't catch that person. So maybe that's a scenario. But I think for the most part, if you're dealing with 200 points you think you can make up, you probably just take that and just hope that you don't get too much carnage, or you can maybe cover as the weeks go. But I guess in a one trade situation, you're not getting Tom Stewart back, are you? And he is a genuine, almost a 120 guy.
Definitely in Supercoach, and he's pushing that 100 regularly through there. So let's, in that scenario, let's address the trade, because I think you're right. I think those are the caveats of why you'd hold him. If you're rankings focused across the formats, he's a move. No questions asked. You're right there. In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, just on the current form, if we, rather than look at overarching season, just over the past 3 weeks, in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, the names you're probably looking at for scoring rather than ownership would be Doherty, Rich, Brayshaw, Dawson, Cumming, Whitfield. Young, surprisingly, might have popped it for a few people, but he's certainly right in the mix. Sinclair, Lloyd, Crisp. They're probably the names that people are looking at, either for a combination of recent scoring history, ceiling, and maybe some uniqueness, while over in Supercoach, very, very similar names. Dawson, Rich, Brayshaw, Doherty. Probably add Vlosten into the mix over there. Sard and Baker, if you really want to go something flavoured it quite differently. And then the only other names that probably should be in the mix in AFL Fantasy, but are most notable in Supercoach in terms of their recent scoring, would be Aaron Hall and Bailey Dale, who plays on Thursday night, minus Caleb Daniels. So those that go, he's been good this year, consistent without being ceiling great, probably might get a suspected bump. Of those kind of max of names, who's standing out to you as kind of top 2 or 3 to trade Stewart to?
Well, MJ, if you don't have any, if this is one of your last trades and you've got the cash, I think if you've got a chance to go to Doherty, you go to Doherty.
Yep.
I think for a lot of people, though, and this is the unfortunate thing with Stewart, is Stewart was a target that a lot of people were looking to round out their side with. If they needed an upgrade, they were sort of almost waiting for Stewart. And he presents a great price this week. So he's not really fairly priced in terms of how good he's been. I think the upside is clearly with Aaron Hall.
Yes, I agree.
And obviously the risk is, and we all know it, is can he get through 8 weeks? If he can get through 8 weeks, I see him maybe not on the Doherty level, but I think he's going with your Sinclairs. He can go with Crisp, your Dawsons in Hewitt, DT. He can
Dawson.
Go with your... Yeah, he's in that realm for a fraction of the cost. And especially if you've got a couple of trades left, sometimes saving that 100K, that could mean you can have a luxury upgrade and take, a Merritt to a Jack Steele or someone like that. So Hall's the one, I think, for me, just purely on upside and the price. Now, clearly there's massive risk.
Of course.
He's in a team that, is clearly struggling. You never know. There's a review going on at the moment. There's all sorts of movements and dealings behind the scenes that could see him lose this role. I don't think he will, based on the evidence we have over the last 2 seasons where North has been, the bottom team. That hasn't changed. That's been actually a constant when he's been fit. The scoring's been outrageous. You'd think the matchup against Geelong, while it's a tough matchup in terms of winning the game, should present Aaron with plenty of opportunities.
Well, their whole fixture's actually quite nice. It's Geelong, Collingwood, Richmond, Hawthorn, Essendon, Sydney, Adelaide, and Gold Coast.
Yeah.
That's for where he and how he plays, and let alone what other teams are trying to do against North, and contrasting him to a Dawson for a moment, across the formats, he's about 85K cheaper, and you'd probably say in a head-to-head matchup over the next 8 weeks, you'd probably say they're relatively comparable, because if you look at Adelaide's run, it's still quite good too. But Melbourne, Hawthorn, Collingwood, Sydney, Carlton, West Coast, North Melbourne, and then Port Adelaide. On side by side, you'd probably feel comfortable that Hall's got a bit more ceiling historically and probably better bang for buck.
Yeah, I think so, MJ. And if you're going to put a line through Hall on his injury and maybe you're worried about a few trades left, I think the guy that I like that's maybe a bit unique is Isaac Cumming. I look at the way the Giants are moving the ball. and some would say not moving the ball, which is why they're scoring so well. You have a look through the informed defenders. You've got in DT, Whitfield and Cumming going at 109 and 107 in their last three.
Yeah.
And we know Himmelberg in the forward line, he's going at 125, Cornelio 121. Like, this is game plan related. There is so much kick mark in the back half. There is so much controlling the ball. I think an Isaac Cumming, he gets a lot of the kick outs already with Himmelberg. And I think if you want a unique guy, his age profile, I don't see him being a guy that gets moved out. He's a real constant in that back line, whereas a Whitfield can be thrown, as we know, across the whole ground. So if you want to go a little bit different, you want a little bit cheaper than the Dawsons and the Sinclairs and these type of guys. And again, Isaac does have some good durability history, and he's at the right age. And as I said, I think the role's safe. He's a guy I like because he can get up to the 120 mark, and we're talking about 8 weeks. So it only takes one monster game. And as crazy as it is, when Himmelberg's dropped to 160, I can see a game where that is Isaac Cumming. It's 15 marks, it's 25 kicks. It's just one of those games that falls his way. And if you get a ceiling game in the back half of the season, that's what, when we start the preseason, isn't MJ? We look and go, geez, Isaac Cumming went at 110 in the last 8. And you really look through and go, oh, there was that 150 and there was a 120, and then the rest was his 95 to 105. So I think he's the type of guy that I do like. Hawthorn, again, a team that like to play pretty quick. So usually I think with the Giants slowing it down, he's the guy I'd go for. It's a bit unique, but it's a really impressive line this year. And like you mentioned, there's guys like Brayshaw and Rich that have been premiums in previous years and have had dips and patches throughout the year. But, even with sailing back, Brayshaw's done his thing. Daniel Rich, it's amazing, isn't it? When you hit that floor, these guys do come back up. I think he was a guy that everyone thought, geez, that's been a bad pick this year. But then he puts together, 111 in his last 3 and that average of 92.
Yeah, and he's got 124 in his last 3 in Supercoach.
Yeah, we know how much of a gunny is there.
Yeah.
So it is funny with those type of guys. Maybe that's something we do have to always think about, isn't it, MJ? As much as we want to chase the top, if you're not getting the real top, sometimes you just have to go for those bounce backs. But I think that's the realm people are looking. I think it's Doherty at the top. I think you have to be a little bit worried about Sinclair, mainly because you're coming into a Carlton matchup, and Carlton is really, really hard to put scores against.
Yeah.
So for me, I think if you just want to go upside, it's Aaron Hall. If you cash Rich, I think you're going to go Doherty or even a Dawson in a Supercoach. And I think maybe if you want something in between, I think an Isaac Cumming is the type of guy that could finish the season really, really well.
I really like him in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. You're probably not looking at him in Supercoach. He's only going about 80, 85 over that last 3.
He's not really an interceptor yet, is he, MJ? He doesn't have that Tom Stewart style, whereas Dawson does. Like, Dawson gets so many intercepts.
Correct.
And he's such a beautiful kicker, whereas Isaac is a good kick, and he's a bit more run and carry than maybe a Dawson, but a lot of it's uncontested.
Yeah, but that's where the different formats.
Yeah, and that's why I think he is a DT sort of play.
That's where a Hayden Young might be the interest for you if you are cash strapped, where you go, there is the intercepts as well as the marks in that game style over there. If you're going, man, I don't have 500K that I can get up to. Okay, those are the things. I think you're right. If dollars are there, you get the best you can get. If the money's not there, well, now you're looking for value and the best return on the run home. I think that's some really good advice. We are at an interesting point of the year too, where the cash cows we're trading into, we do want some level of security about them to a degree, but we're not looking to trade into these guys for on-field, really, though, are we? We're looking for them to free up stuff.
And MJ, it's probably more of a DT Supercoach thing, because we're so trade restricted by this point of the season that just having a heartbeat that if we do get to 0 trades and we can't do anything, can they just bob up and give us 30, 40, 50 extra points? And as we always say this time of year, often there's a reason they haven't played. We've been waiting for Elijah Hollins all year. And I think at the start of the season, he was the guy that you thought, DPP, I can take a good score in round 1. But there must be a reason and barring massive injuries, and especially in a team like Gold Coast that's right in the hunt for the 8,
Yeah.
I think it's the teams down the bottom where if you're going to take a flyer on a West Coast, a North Melbourne,
Even
an
in Adelaide.
Yeah, Adelaide. Like, take a flyer, Essendon, take a flyer and see,
Hawthorn.
can they give this person a game? But I think often just going the cheapest with DPP, I think now that people have cottoned on, especially in DT and Supercoach, that you can actually move your team around without actually using trades. And people will know that strategy of what you can do in terms of bringing in someone, reversing it, and actually, taking a Paddy McCartan, for example, to your forward line from your back line without needing someone to swing with. So I think opening up those DPPs, sometimes you can actually get just the coverage, and that's actually more important than having that playing player. But really, MJ, I think when people are downgrading, all they want to know is, can I get the premium I want? Because there's no guarantee. As good as Massimo is, he could be out of the team in 2 weeks. Or as Bazzo, he's got that flexibility, a little bit more expensive. But I think people are just going to go, what do I have to do to get the player I want? And if that's someone that's just not going to play, well, it's impossible to predict these guys over the last 8 weeks. And also, when do you need them? Every chance the one game they miss is the game you need them. That's just the nature of the beast in this, isn't it?
Well, and that's it. Like, we're entering at time of recording. There's some question marks over a Rory Laird, that he was seen wearing the non-contact training cap at work, even a Patrick Cripps, let alone some others that have been innuendo and rumoured around through there. It is starting where not luck plays a part in things, but certainly there are variances that now start to kick into the game. So, before we talk any more about that, what's your thought? Like, we're moving away potentially from these security cows, so to speak. Maybe people are still rolling into Conning, a Saligo, things of that nature that we think they'll be there. They're best 22 now. How risk averse should you be? Or is it just about getting the best available?
I think you just got to get the points on field, MJ. Don't you really? You just got to go for it. I think that's the point. Everyone you're up against, if they're not in that position where they don't need their bench, they're going points on field. Cash generation now, anyone you trade in, you're probably not going to trade that cow back out. So I think that's why people go, just get the dollars on field, put them to points and see what happens. Clearly, that's the crystal ball that everyone wants to know, isn't it? How many trades do I need for the last 5 weeks? Well, it just depends.
We'll tell you in hindsight, won't we?
And that's the thing. There's been years where, I know I've left trades for the back end and the carnage hasn't come. And then on the flip side, we've all had years where, we're out of trades with 5 weeks to go and 4, 5, 6 injuries happen and you have a nosedive. And that's just the thing you don't know. Again, I think that's why people always go, just give me the points now and whatever happens. So I think there'll be a lot of people going, cheapest cow, and that's the thing. If you've got 2 trades left and you can get the premium you want and you've got, say, 150K in Supercoach, well, maybe you do have the luxury to bring someone in who's even gone up a little bit. Like, you're always going to pick the best available. Maybe you do just go for 2, I guess, average players, MJ. Maybe you go for 2 of those guys that have fallen premiums almost in a 350, 400K range in Supercoach and just go, let's see what happens. It might be better than a basement cow and a premium. If you think you can massage all that stuff, but it does get a bit tricky to do that sort of stuff, doesn't it? Because how many times do you loophole them on and get the poor score on the field and take away 100 on? So I think just get the points on the field, get the best players you think you can and the ones you like. And again, and that like is only for 8 weeks now. It's you have to put that past 15 rounds behind us.
It doesn't matter, does it?
No, and that's where we, in hindsight, we'll see these Thomases of last year, De Goeys of last year, and we'll try to obviously pick them. But it's not easy to do because sometimes, stuff does start changing now. But to have the trades to actually do it, that's where AFL Fantasy, you can be really aggressive with, well, that's a bit different. I haven't seen this guy getting 50, 60% CBAs all year.
Yeah.
Key player goes out. That's the stuff we're waiting for. I don't think at this point there's anything that jumps out to me that says, this could be the De Goey of last year. Clear role change, bargain price. We know obviously with the rucks, there's been some when that main ruck goes out and we've really benefited from those. But even a Jackson and a Cameron, MJ,
Yeah.
Where does it sit now? We know Grundy's flagging round 18 as his return.
Yeah, it sounds
know
like
that
Gorn
Gawn is
17.
around 17. So we're getting one game from Jackson in that current role. Now, who knows how they integrate Gawn back into the team? Is it a bit more of a split? Watching that game closely last week, Jackson benefited massively from McInerney grabbing it out of the ruck and, getting a push on, which is a tackle. Like all these sort of things that, when you're getting 9 tackles, that's great for fantasy. That's huge. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Riley O'Brien this week. And, was that trade worth it, I guess, per se? I think it all depends on what your goal of Jackson was. Was he someone that you wanted as cover in the back half of the season? You got a little hit to cover you the first 2 weeks and then you sort of slide him to the bench and he just covers you in between? Or was he someone that you thought, I'll get a 2 or 3 rounds from him, maybe generate 50 to 60K and move on? And especially in AF, that was all people could do. They were trying to put out multiple fires.
That's right.
Last week, and it was just the best you could do. And obviously you've lucked into a massive score and worry about the future. Sometimes there is setbacks. Sometimes there's things that gets delayed. So you've banked a good score. I think now personally for Jackson, it gets quite tricky to bring him in. I don't really know what your goal is there, because I would think you would have addressed English last week. If that was something that you were weighing up Jackson and you didn't go that path, there really hasn't been a ruckman at this stage before teams that's out. Darcy's playing, Cameron's playing, Witts is playing. All these guys are playing. So you'd be thinking, do you need to fill that same issue that pretty much everyone had last week? I wouldn't think so. So I think for me, if you're a Jackson owner, happy days. I don't think should be too many people jumping on now. I just don't know what your end game is there.
At this point, aren't you? You're now just reactionary maneuvers now going, I might get a value F6 that can... But the reality is, while he has popped some good scores with Gawn this year and to a degree last year, we know the narrative of how he got there. So the only way I could advocate for it, of trading into Jackson, is for 2 approaches. One, it's a very aggressive 1-week trade. I don't think there's the money to make from it, but if that's the best you can get, but you can do more next week and you've got the volume of trades to do it, sure. Or 2, you're intending for him to push to F7 and R3 for the year and not be on your field in 2 weeks' time. Yeah. And he's just your interchangeable maneuver between Teakle, English, and whatever comes your way. Those are the only 2 caveats. If it is neither of those, for me, I just feel like you're underbuying and you've just missed on him last week. We've already, it's jumping around a bit, but one of our Patreons asked the question to jump ahead a little bit. They're going, if you held Tim English to this point, the club have confirmed he won't play this week. This is before teams have come out. We know that they're not playing with the Thursday night game. If you've committed this far to the English hold, is there a circumstance where you can see you need to abort out of that, or is that team dependent?
Well, it'd be very team dependent. I think it'd be an AFL fantasy move. Sure. I think in DT and Supercoach, English is so good. So in my head, I think of it like this. If you've got cover, now that might be something you don't have. But just say, even if we say you don't have cover, right, MJ? Let's say you were going to trade him to a Treloar. Let's say Treloar's 100 tonight. Like, I've got English as a 110 guy. So I've got 7 weeks of English going 10 points more than Treloar. That pegs back 70 of those 100 points that I've lost this week. Yeah, so I've done a trade for 30 points in my scenario. Now, again, Treloar went bigger and if English went less and missed games, but there's not, unless you may be missing a Bont in Supercoach and it's a big dog and you think he's going to go pound for pound. But if you're going to someone that's, again, pretty much everyone outside of Bont is in Supercoaches below him, Dunkley, there's not many guys that are on English's level. So if you're dropping to that lower tier in the 90, 95 range in AF, to me, I'm going, English is going to chase down a lot of those points that you've gained because like you're probably going to be complete. So if you want to get English back, now you're spending another trade to get, a Brody up or someone like that. I think you just got to see what you've got, and I'd probably be just trying to arm myself with enough cash to, to do that. But again, maybe you're in a position where last week you had so much carnage that you made that move, and a lot of people moved him on last week, and they thought it was a 1 weeker, and now they've been fortunate that it is 2 for their sense. So I think it's AF only. I think in a super coach DT, I just don't see you gaining enough points doing it. AF, I can see the merit in it, just to keep, again, especially if you're complete, there's probably is no reason to not just sideways, exactly. Because you're probably just thinking again that you'll sideways your other premium to get him back in in a week or two. So that's the format. I think that first advice is very, as I said, DT and Supercoach, where you do have to think, I'm spending a trade to gain 100 points, but I'm probably not going to have the luxury of trading English back. Like, you know what I mean, MJ? All of a sudden, you're probably spending 2 or 3 trades in that scenario. You got one to get English out, then you got to trade a Heaney, a Brody back to English. Now, if you don't have the cash there, or if the price movements aren't favourable for you, it can be hard to do, and it's just something that I don't see much game. But in AF, you probably can move him on. Now, again,
I think in AF it's pretty strong.
It's tricky.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
Grundy's 1 week closer, but again, it really is its own beast. AF MJ. There's so much you can do in terms of making those almost weekly moves, especially if you complete. You really are just shuffling deck chairs. So at least you're shuffling and getting the premium playing this week, because obviously English isn't.
Yeah, well, in AFL Fantasy, what you're really trying to do, I think most teams in AFL Fantasy are at the very top 100, at worst, one genuine trade away from feeling they've got all the undesirable options off their ground. Maybe a little bit further, there's 2, and one of those could be a Nick Dacos type, but any team that's kind of really worth its salt in that format of AFL Fantasy has nothing more than 3 issues that they've got to contend with, and that's using Dacos in inverted commas.
Yeah, Dacos would be an issue for them. A Cripps would be an issue. Like, that's what their issues are, let alone
correct. It's the underperforming premium.
And that's why they're up there, aren't they, MJ? Is they might have missed that bullet where everyone had to spend a week sidewaysing a premium, and they had another downgrade, and that's why they're advanced. Or they've hit that player 150k cheaper than the masses, and we know what that does. So it's always interesting when you're comparing what you're trying to get at, because that's why we always talk about ownership of these top teams, because if you're chasing them, going the same players isn't going to, you're going to have to risk being further behind to catch up a lot of the time.
Agree. And that's the dilemma for coaches. And for some of these guys that have been the bolters and the value options that we're holding on to, they're coming to their wall. For Luke Jackson, you've already talked about what does the Gorn coming back do? It's clearly going to impact his performance from what we saw last week. Now, is it closer to the 70 or 80 odd that we saw, depending on the format, than it was the big hundreds? I think it's more likely to be closer, but for a week or two, we might get a little bit of gravy that kind of falls our way. Similarly with Darcy Cameron, Ian's one of our patrons has asked a question thinking, well, what's the impact of Cameron coming back? Grundy coming back for Cameron? I think that the answer is substantial. You don't have a player of Brody Grundy's pedigree who's slated for round 18 and then just go, only ruck 30% of the game.
Yeah, especially when you know Cameron is so competent up forward, MJ. And he actually does a bit of that in his current role with Mason Cox. Like, he still scores great. And
That's
he's,
right.
He's a tackler. He is a threat going forward. He can take a mark and kick a goal. So the beautiful thing about Cameron, especially in an AF, is look at the price you're going to be selling at.
Correct.
Like you're talking about 100k to go to almost a top 10 midfielder. You've got so many options there. You can go to English without too much stress. So I think in a DT, that's where really savvy coaches, if they've got enough trades, they're just eyeing off and going, when Grundy is back in, I am making that move before I even see them back together, because you'd be fortunate if you got the current output you're getting. It would be a fluky game, in my opinion, if Darcy Cameron kept doing what he was doing with Grundy back in the side, especially when, as I said, most of those teams probably don't have English, or if they do, well, now they're choosing any forward they want. And I think you're going to almost be making 100K on those moves by then. You're probably going to be using Cameron to go to that flyer, that person that's got the role change, and he's going to do it for the last 5 weeks.
Well, it's about probably after the round this week with Darcy Cameron, just using AFL Fantasy as the example, it'll be 80 to 90 grand just next week to go Cameron to English. And you've probably got the luxury of waiting that extra, and it might be 75 or 65,000. That's assuming English has a bit of a drop and that kind of.
And we know, MJ, the points alone on that could be, like, honestly, they could be 40 points in 1 week.
Yeah,
like that would be English being a 110 and Cameron being a 70.
Yes, which again is closer to what Cameron was when he was in that way. So I think one
guy's a really good forward, and one guy's pretty much a ruckman. So it's going to be hard for him to get. Again, I'd be surprised if they really shuffled it around.
Drastically, while they're pushing for finals. Yeah.
The other thing you got to think about too is they're on a 5-game winning streak at the moment.
Yeah.
They're playing Gold Coast on Saturday night, which is a massive, massive game.
Yeah.
But the run home is really friendly. So now, like, I've got Collingwood easily in the 8, and honestly, I could see them really pushing the 4 just with the fixture and those other top teams, cannibalizing themselves almost with some of the runs that, the Dogs have, and obviously some of the other teams that are really up, even Melbourne, Geelong and Brisbane, like they all clash again. Carlton's got to play Melbourne. So I think Collingwood's that team that's probably thinking, you wouldn't be surprised if it was an extra week for Grundy. I wouldn't be surprised if it was
goes VFL
a VFL half. Like, there's not a rush. Now, if you're getting not 20, 21, 22, if you're getting 4 games with him before finals to work out your mix, like that seems more likely to me, but I think that's probably a problem again for Cameron. Wait 2 more weeks. He's going great guns. He's provided so much cover and flexibility with the dramas we've had in the rucks. It's been honestly one of the picks of the year.
I agree. Yeah, it's been an absolute monster. Hey, teams, chances are by the time you're listening to this episode, teams are already out. And so we'll definitely try to recap some of the information for you. Maybe we'll jump on like a Facebook Live or something like that later in the week. Before we do let you go, Kane, got a couple of Patreon questions we want to throw out there for you. Stephen wants to know, in AFL Fantasy, is there any 190K ruck rookies that you can see might get a game? The reason he's asking that, and I think a few are thinking this, Jamison has got a fair bit of coin that's probably now with Nick Nat back, not going to be maximised. Similar with those still stuck with maybe a Hugh Dixon. Teakle was the one. He's not really going to play for the rest of the year, especially with Lysat now due very, very soon to be back. Is there anybody that you go, they're a heartbeat?
Let me just quickly check the injury list because, like Charlie Comben was that one MJ that was actually doing quite nicely in the VFL. He's listed at 1 to 2 weeks.
Yep.
So he'd probably be one that I'd think about. Edwards seems like they really want to give him time, but he's not really putting in performances that warrant getting into that side. And we know that, to be fair, Sherry and Goldstein's actually,
it's hard to go
better
against
parts
those
of their
two
team.
at the moment.
But I would think Comben might be your guy. I think the time of Visitini when we thought maybe he was a chance is going to pass with Lysette coming back in.
I agree.
I don't see a Samson Ryan. I don't see Benning. So in short, there's not much that's going to be a heartbeat. I would think if I had to, I'd go Comben, thinking that maybe in round 20 plus, he might be getting a chance as in that ruck forward split. It's again
that comes back to that DPP flexibility, which is less help needed in ultimate.
And North
footy.
Are usually more of a Sunday operator from the top of my head. So maybe you get some flexibility there, but really it might be a fixture thing.
Dependent.
You know what I mean, MJ? Like, North's a Saturday, Sunday. So they're towards the back of most weeks where you can have a play, but really I'd have to look a little bit closer at the fixture because I don't see any of them really providing cover per se. I would just be going with who can I use, which of the DPPs plays the latest which is actually where Teakle's actually been quite handy in that sense. They've played the last game, the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's true. Look, the guys that you need injuries that could open the doors would be a Moyle and Ramsden from Gold Coast and Hawthorn.
Yeah.
But you're requiring injuries to open up that, which is never what you want to be doing. I think to your point, where we're trading into these guys and hoping for a heartbeat, you've got to go with opportunity getting knocked rather than someone getting injured. Luck's a part of this. Absolutely. But I'm totally with you on that. 2 questions, and then I know we've got to wrap it up. It's a rapid fire podcast for you today. Brendan, who I believe he's actually the number 1 guy in Dream Team at the moment, but he's asking a super coach question because, why not?
He doesn't need help in the other format, MJ.
Doesn't need help. He's kind of alluded to something that we've talked about, but I think there's a broader question, and Ian's got a very similar question. It's around if you've got Nick Dacos, is that the last trade priority, or are you continually to maximize cash elsewhere? I suppose, they're both super coach related questions. Do you keep dealing with other cow issues or other underperforming premiums, or is once you can move Dacos up to Aaron Hall, just as an example, do you just bite the bullet and do that?
Well, I guess it depends what else you've got on the field. And if you've got other rookies, I'd be getting them off the field first. Dacos' form in Supercoach is frankly on par with a lot of the premiums he'd be trading in. He's 106 in his last 3, really consistent, really comfortable, just come off the bye. Great fixture, really good fixture, especially in the next 4. So again, it'd be a low priority for me, but at the same time, I think those premiums will put, anywhere between 15 and 25 points on him an average per week. So that, if it's 25 points, you're looking at 200 points across the next 8 games. If it's closer to 10, 15, maybe it's only 100. But I think you do make that move and you identify what defender you don't have. Clearly, if Stewart was playing and it's going to cost you only 100 odd K, just over 100K to get Stewart.
Yeah.
Now you're talking 30 to 40 points. It could be across that stretch. So lower priority than the Cows, but again, I think he is a player that he's been superb, but it's odds on continuing this output for a whole season. We see with these Cows, they do have dips. Yeah. It's just the nature of being a first-year player, even if he's one of the best we've ever had.
Yeah, and I think that's a good shout too. We talk up the Sam Walsh season. Arguably, this is better. Pound for pound, given the DPP that's kind of popped in, probably you could say he is the best.
MJ, look, the reason that he's so good is look what he did in the buys. In the 2 buy rounds, he gave you 113 and 112. When you needed him the most,
he delivered.
You got a good score. You got a monster score.
Yeah, he absolutely did. Hey, mate, always appreciate you jumping on this podcast episode. It's a rapid fire one for us today. As always, mate, you're a superstar.
Thank you, MJ. Enjoy the round of footy, everyone. It should be a belter.
It kicks off tonight, Thursday night footy. A lot of people using a VC this evening, whether it be McRae, Bontempelli, Dunkley or Neil. A lot of people, very popular VC options, and then a lot of very expectant Clayton Oliver owners that his dominance of the Crows continues on. I think 2 of his last 3 games in Supercoach have been 200 plus. So it'll be interesting to see if we pop a 130 in Supercoach with a Neil or McRae. The Oliver owners go for the gluttony maneuver.
MJ, that's the last thing I will say is, what is your line there? Because I think a lot of people want the VC on Oliver just to go, see what you do, Clayton, and I'll work out the rest after that. Because as you mentioned, if you're a person that likes form against an opponent, and I saw what this, I did have a cheeky look before at Supercoach and see what their projection was. Not that we ever, really base our decisions off the Supercoach projected, but it does have some merit in it, and it had him at 193. So if you've got a high projected score, maybe just see if you got the C on Oliver because, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, maybe then there's some options later in the round that might be safer captains.
I think Miller.
Miller's got a good matchup against the Pies. I think Josh Kelly is perfectly fine against the Hawks. Andy Brayshaw's probably not been as great of late, but certainly against Port, you'd feel relatively comfortable with that. And then Yeah, I think
We
that's
can't
probably
get
it,
greedy
to be
though,
honest.
MJ. I think a McRae, Bont, or Neil tonight, I think they all sort of go their own direction and don't get too much attention. And
Even Mills
um,
against the Bombers is a
yeah,
decent play.
I know you
too,
want it
so.
to be all after Oliver, but unless you're going Oliver Miller, I think you've probably got to take one tonight, just with the
Oh, I think
popularity
so.
of picks.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lad's out in that equation due to Oliver. So
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people will go, MJ. And tonight will be interesting to see what people do with that line. I think it probably does get to 130.
Yep.
I think as
In
good as Oliver
Supercoach,
is,
agree.
that's you're getting a bit greedy. And I always think with these guys that perform well against them, does Matty Nix, for example, go, this guy's murdered us multiple times. Do we do something extra? Does it impact him? Who knows?
Yep.
But I think if you're getting a 130 and you miss the 200, that's just unlucky, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. Sometimes the hunt can sometimes burn you on the way. If you want to go and check out any of the articles we've dropped during the week, the Ultimate Footy DPPs are there, an article for our Patreons about Luke Jackson and a bunch of other stuff, all at coachespanel.tv. Enjoy the weekend of footy, and we can't wait to chat to you next time here at the Coaches Panel.